Good morning, 8th grade. Welcome to Chapter 18, Section 2, Big Business and Organized Labor. So first of all, let me warn you that this is a pretty long section. Bear with me, I know it's going to be difficult to manage. So starting with some new businesses that pop up around this time. So entrepreneurs are people who set up businesses in order to make a profit. They create their own businesses. And at this time, entrepreneurs helped lead a business boom. There were lots of new businesses popping up at this time. Many small businesses grew and became corporations, or businesses owned by many investors. Corporations make money by selling stocks or shares, like percentages of a company, to investors. So you could buy stock in Facebook, for instance, and that means you own 1% of Facebook, although I'm sure one stock is much less than 1%. Investors who are called stockholders in this system would receive a share of the profits and help pick which investors would run the company. One benefit to investing this way is that investors could only lose as much money as they put in. So if you spend $100,000 on stocks, the most you could lose is that $100,000. And that helps put investors in control of their finances in some way. Moving on to banks. So banks loan money to corporations to help them get started. This helped businesses grow, and it made a large profit for investors off of the interest, right? Because banks charge interest for the loans that they give. J. Pierpont Morgan, aka J.P. Morgan, who you might know from J.P. Morgan Chase Banks, became a powerful force in the economy by offering loans to key industries like railroads and steel. He saw that there were opportunities for people who wanted to start businesses in those industries, so he wanted to bankroll them. He wanted to give them money that they could use to start their businesses. And he also invested in troubled corporations to help them turn around. And again, he and his banks will be making big profit off of that, particularly from the interest of those loans. So when we look at the relationship between government and businesses, the government took a laissez-faire approach to regulating business practices. And laissez-faire means hands-off. They're not going to intervene. Businesses can do what they do. This led to a rise of monopolies. And a monopoly is when one company controls most or all of the business in a particular industry. So think about the game Monopoly, right? You want to own as many properties as you can, and your competitors have no choice but to land on your spaces, right? When they roll the dice, inevitably they're going to land on your spaces and owe you money. Same concept, but in businesses, right? So if I own every t-shirt making factory in the United States, if you want to buy a t-shirt, you have no choice but to give me money. That's how Monopoly works, right? So we could think of things like Con Ed, right, which is might be said to have a monopoly on power distribution here in New York City. You don't have other options, right? It's your one choice. So we're going to look at some key players in these notes. We're going to look at some more in class. But Mr. Andrew Carnegie is somebody we need to know about at this time. So he was born a poor Scottish immigrant, and he worked for the railroads. Shortly after, or sometime after I should say, he entered the steel industry and slowly was able to start buying different parts of the steel making process. And by doing this, he created this Carnegie Steel Company, which consisted of iron mines, steel mills, railroads, shipping lines. So he controlled every phase of the steel production process, and in so doing was able to acquire a great amount of wealth for himself. If he owned a steel mill, right, typically you would have to buy iron from someone who owns an iron mine. He owned the mine as well, so he was able to really keep the wealth in his own pocket. Carnegie Steel produced more steel than all the mills in England combined at this time period. He was a ruthless business leader, and he preached the gospel of wealth, which we'll look at more in class. Basically, Carnegie believed that the rich had a responsibility to improve society. If you've got money, you've got to use it to do good. Moving on to John D. Rockefeller of Rockefeller Center. So Rockefeller was the son of a peddler in New York, and by peddler we mean like, so basically someone that begged on the streets, right? He gained some money for himself, and he decided to invest it in an oil refinery. And then once he made profits from that oil refinery, he used those profits to buy other oil companies. And John D. Rockefeller was ruthless. He would often cut his prices in order to run his competitors out of business, and then he could raise his prices again. And in order to really eliminate his competition, he formed the Standard Oil Trust. A trust is a group of corporations that are run by a single board of directors. So it seems like there are a bunch of different businesses you could go to for a certain product, but it's really the same people who are in charge of them. We've got the illusion of choice with a trust. And trusts are going to be a hot-button issue at this time. We'll discuss them more in class. So looking against trusts, right? Trusts are a threat to free enterprise. Free enterprise is the system that lets privately owned businesses compete freely. The idea behind free enterprise is that anyone in an industry should have as much chance as somebody else in an industry of making money, right? So if, going back to my t-shirt factory model, right? If I can have a t-shirt factory, so could you. And if you want to charge less, you could charge less. That's the idea behind free enterprise. For trusts, the people that supported them said that big businesses create jobs and sustain the economy, right? If there are really big trust-like corporations, that means they're going to need a lot of employees, and that's going to be good for our country. People also said that by limiting the competition, companies could lower their prices. Okay, they could. Most likely will they? Probably not, but some people use this argument nonetheless. Okay, social Darwinism, a theory I love. So first we have to get scientific. So Charles Darwin developed this theory of survival of the fittest, right? And it came to be known as Darwinism. Survival of the fittest states that the strongest and most adaptable life forms will survive. He's talking biologically, right? If a T-Rex could, fight better and kill prey better than a Stegosaurus could, the T-Rex is going to live. I understand that a Stegosaurus is a plant-eating dinosaur. It was a bad analogy. That's okay. But you get the gist, right? Whatever is stronger, tougher, faster, that will out-survive the weaker forms of that species. Yeah, my dinosaur metaphor is bad. That's okay. Social Darwinism, so I think this is such an interesting theory. Applied Darwin's idea, social Darwinism takes the idea away from science and biology and moves it towards human affairs. And the idea behind social Darwinism is that whoever is strongest will get what he wants. And social Darwinism, this theory, supported big businesses and was used to justify harsh working conditions, right? And I think there's ways we see this play out today, although maybe not under this name, right? I know people who are investment bankers who work 16-hour days, and the theory is if they're willing to, put in that time, they're going to earn more money and they're going to come out on top, right? So we see that with social Darwinism, we're pitting people against each other. Hey, if you can afford to buy out all your competitors and you're the leading in the industry, that's social Darwinism, baby. You are capable of being strong and making money. Get out. That was me and Sydney interrupting these notes that you're going to listen to now. Shocking no one. Moving on to women and children. We're looking at the roles that they played in businesses at this time. Women actually outnumbered men in textile mills, tobacco factories, and garment sweatshops. Those were the biggest industries that women were found in at this time. There were not really child labor laws at this time, so children were put to work. They worked in bottle factories, textile mills, tobacco factories, coal mines, and garment sweatshops. If they were working, that meant they couldn't go to school, obviously, right? And this is where we get into a vicious cycle. If you can't go to school, you can't educate yourself to get into a better position in life, and you're going to be stuck doing this really grueling factory work day in and day out for the rest of your life. We'll look at the effect this had on children as we study this unit more in class. All right, so needless to say, conditions in factories were not ideal at this time. There's a long list of dangers. So breathing in fibers or dust, getting burnt, death, low pay, long hours, little to no workers' comp for injuries on the job are all big problems at this time period. This is one we're going to look at more deeply in class. So one of the biggest things that brought those problems to light in the minds of the public was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So on March 25th, 1911, a fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. The doors had been locked to keep workers in. There was only one fire escape, and needless to say, nearly 150 people died, right? We're going to look at this a lot more in class. It's definitely seen as one of the biggest tragedies in New York City history. But the benefit that came from it is that it led to improved safety laws over time. All right, this is a long section. I'm sorry, guys. So unions, we looked at this briefly when we talked about the Grange. So unions are groups of workers who fight to protect their rights in the workplace and ensure that everyone is being treated fairly. The idea is that if the workers join together, they have more power than an individual person asking for change. So during this period of industrial growth, unions fought for safer working conditions, higher wages, and shorter hours. One such labor union was the Knights of Labor. It formed in Philadelphia in 1869. They admitted all adult workers, including women, African Americans, immigrants, and unskilled workers. Terence Powderly was elected president of the union in 1879, and he tried to win support by holding public rallies and really publicizing the work that the union was trying to accomplish. He did not believe that strikes were effective, and when you go on strike, right, you're refusing to work until conditions get better. He didn't think that was the way to go. Violent disputes led to public disapproval of unions like the Knights of Labor. So one example, in Haymarket Square in Chicago, workers who were on strike actually set off a bomb that killed 7 policemen. The policemen then shot into the crowd. Obviously, if you're someone sitting at home reading the newspaper and finding out about this, you're probably not going to support that type of behavior and probably not going to have the best view of unions. Of course, not every union was like this, but these stories got a lot of publicity. Moving on to the American Federation of Labor, which was formed by Samuel Gompers in Columbus, Ohio in 1886. So they only admitted skilled workers because they believed that skilled workers have more power. Their talents are hard to match, so employers would want to meet their needs, right? They're not easily replaceable. And Gompers emphasized the efficiency of collective bargaining. So when unions negotiate together with management, asking for things that the workers want as a group. This only included a small percentages of American workers because it excluded African Americans, immigrants, and unskilled workers. Moving on to Mary Harris Jones. So she campaigned for unions and gave support to striking miners. She drew attention to the difficult lives experienced by children who worked in textile mills particularly. And people nicknamed her Mother Jones since she did so much work with children and for children specifically. So in 1893, we get a severe economic depression, and in order to cut costs, many business owners decide to cut production, fire workers, and slash wages or pay for those workers that are still working within the industry. A wave of violent strikes spread across the nation, including the Pullman strike. So here's the story. George Pullman owned a company that manufactured railroad cars. He cut his workers' pay by 25%. So, Pullman also provided housing for his workers, but they had to pay him rent. So he cut their pay by 25%, but refused to lower rents on company-owned housing that was offered to his employees. He knows they're making less money. He should know that they're going to have trouble actually paying their rent on time. So railroad workers went on strike in support of Pullman's workers. This meant that rail lines got shut down from coast to coast. President Cleveland actually sent troops to Chicago to end the strike. They were joined by deputies that were paid by the railroads. Shots were fired in the crowd, killing 2 workers. We're seeing really how high the stakes were at this time period. And I believe this is the last one for today. I know it was a doozy. So in violent disputes like this, the American people often chose to side with owners instead of workers, right? The idea was you have a job, do it. Okay, the pay isn't great, but you're getting paid. Suck it up. People saw unions as radical and violent. They were taking action that was unnecessary in the eyes of the public. And by 1900, only 3% of workers belonged to unions. Today, pretty shockingly, only about 12% of workers belong to unions. So let me confirm, yes, that was the end. I'm sorry that this was such a long section. We will discuss this in great detail in class over the next few days. In the meantime, have a good afternoon, guys.